Something overdue we should add is toggling visibility of the examine and drop down buttons in our drop down menu. So let's open our drop down menu widget, content, UMG, inventory, and inventory drop down. Right now the use section right here, we can toggle its visibility for can be used, but we do not do the same for the can be examined and can be dropped. So we could just copy and paste this twice, plug them in. By the way, I'm in the update menu custom event, and can be examined, or let's see, switch this out for the, that's the examine button. Examine section, switch that out. You can just drag it over this part right here, and it'll update it to examine section, and this part, the drop section. And can be examined, we'll go into this index, and can be dropped, we'll go into this index. And that way, if we take our door key, and let's say this one can't be dropped either, and then the flashlight, let's say it can't be examined, you can see it updates. We have use and drop, and for this one we just have examine. Now hypothetically, if we have an item that can't be used, examined, or dropped, we don't want the menu to show up when we click on that item at all. Let's make it so the drop-down menu won't even show up if the item cannot be used, examined, or dropped. So let's take the door key, so BP inventory item door key, and let's uncheck examined, just for testing purposes. And when we play, did I press E? I'm not sure. And we click, it still opens the menu even though we don't see anything. As you can see, I'm hovering over the items and it doesn't register. And if I click somewhere, it closes it again and we can hover over them again. So let's open our W inventory slot widget right here. And on the slot button, we'll have to find the on released slot button right here, open drop down menu, and we can bring these over just a bit, and let's get our player ref variable, and then BPC inventory, and then get item data at index, this function that we use quite often, and our index will be the index. Our item, get class defaults, and we can break that. And let's just let's move these out of the way a bit. And let's just get a not boolean from all three of these. Just copy and paste that. And then an and boolean for all three of these. So we'll have to press add pin right here for 3 conditions. Plug it in. So if we create an if statement right here, which we will, it only goes down the true path if all 3 of these are false. Now, I want to switch that. I only want it to go through the false path when all 3 are false. So we add another not boolean right here, and that inverts it. So on true, we open the drop-down menu. On false, this means can be used, can be examined, and can be dropped are all false. And if that's false, we don't want to open the drop-down menu. And now we can test it in game with our keys. And if I click on it, nothing happens. Great. Let's go back into our world with our actual camera here. There we go. I'm going to change this to something like 4, just so it doesn't, we can actually see that we can pick it up when we have enough. It's just kind of getting annoying that it takes up everything. And let's go into the 2 inventory items, flashlight, battery, and door key. Flashlight, battery, I'm going to turn this can be examined back on, and I'm going to turn the door key back to can be examined and can be dropped. So let's also make it so the drop-down menu closes when we open our examination widget and then close the inventory. For an example of what I'm talking about, if we pick up an item, examine it, and then close it again by backspace or tab, this menu is still open, and I'd rather have it open like this. So we can do that in our BPC inventory, and let's find that custom event, create examination widget. So this is called when we open our examination widget, and when we open it is when we want to close the drop-down menu. So we're going to do it right before we add the examination ref to the viewport, and we can just get this from our menu ref. Drop down. We will get the W inventory drop down, and we just have to ask if it's valid. Is valid. Use the macro. And if it is valid, we will call close drop down menu, which is a custom event we made in our inventory menu ref. And if it is not valid, we will just go straight to adding to viewport. So now when we test it out, examine, we're examining, and we decide we're done, I'm gonna hit backspace, it is now gone. Works the same if you just hit tab to go back as well. Alright, now that that's been cleaned up, let's add two things to our examination widget. A default rotation for each item, and being able to rotate our items in-game. So do you notice how the door key is rotated in an unflattering way when we open it? You can see we have our battery and our door key. Do a battery first. It's a pretty nice default rotation. And our door key, much more unflattering. So we want to have a default rotation for each one. So we'll do this, as always, in our struct. So go to blueprints, structs, and item data. And we'll add a new variable, and we'll call it examination mesh rotation. And it'll be of type rotator. And I'm just going to start closing all of these. We'll have to reopen a few of them, but I like to keep it all clean every once in a while. So let's open our blueprints, actors, inventory, and our master inventory item to compile it so that we can adjust our children. So now we have our examination mesh rotation. Now the battery, I'm going to leave because I think it is fine. For the door key, we'll need to adjust. But first let's code it in. So let's go to our content, UMG, inventory. Let's just save all real quick. And let's open W examination. And we'll do this in our update widget custom event after we set the location. And we can just set relative rotation. The target is going to be the item mesh. And the new rotation will just come from our examination mesh rotation. So now we can adjust the door key. Let's try 90 on the Y, see how that looks. So let's hit play. And it is upside down, so let's try -90. Let's hit play again. Examine, and that looks great. And our battery should also look good because it is still 0. So it looks great. So let's add in in-game rotation. So we have to go back in W examination. And if you remember, we created this image called drag detection. This is on the top, and this is what we'll be using to detect our drag. So let's go to our graph. And here in functions, we need to select this little override tab. And we need to override the function for on mouse button down. So we'll click it, it'll create this for us. So when it detects our mouse button down, this will be called. So we need a boolean to know if we want to be rotating our mesh when our mouse moves. So it'll just be a boolean, we'll call it rotate mesh. It'll default to false. This will give us a warning, don't worry, we'll come back to that. And when the mouse button is down, we want to set the rotate mesh to true. So when we click down, we want the mesh to rotate. The return value needs a return value of whether the event was handled or unhandled. And we want to set this to handled. And we'll compile and save. Before we close this though, we also want to get the mouse location when we click down. So we will get the player controller, and then get mouse position scaled by DPI. And out of the location X and Y, we will make a vector 2D. Just plug in the X and the Y. And we want to store this as variable. So we'll drag off, promote to variable, not local. And we will call this mouse location. Plug it in like that. Alright, compile and save. That's all we need for that one. Let's create another override on mouse button up. So when we release our mouse button, we will no longer want to rotate. So we'll set rotate mesh to false, and that'll be it. And we can return this as handled. And then we also want to override on mouse move. So when we move our mouse, and we only want to rotate our mesh if this rotate mesh boolean is true. So we'll create a branch from it, and we'll plug that in. And if it's true, we'll have to get the BPC inventory ref variable we made, and then get the BP examination item reference from there. So remember, this is a reference to the actual BP examination actor out here. Just get back in here real quick. And out of here, we need to get the item mesh, which is the mesh in the actor. And we just need to add world rotation when the mouse is moving. Out of this rotation, let's make a rotator right here at the bottom. So it splits it. And then we could just get our mouse location. And we also need to get the current mouse location. So this is the starting location. To get the current, we just get the same code that we used in our on mouse button down. Get player controller, get mouse position scaled, and make vector 2D. So I'm gonna copy this, and I'm gonna paste it right here. And then we can just subtract vector 2D minus vector 2D. Subtract these two. And we can just break this result. And X, moving our mouse on the X axis, we want to rotate the item on the Z axis. But it will be inverted if we do it like this. So I'll let you know now we can multiply a float by a float and multiply it by -1 to invert it. And Y will go into Y. Moving our mouse on the Y-axis will rotate the mesh on the Y-axis. After we add this world rotation, we need to reset the starting mouse location. So we can just multiply or copy and paste this code once again and set our mouse location variable. And then we want to set the return value to unhandled because it's always updating. And now let's test that out and see if it works. So let's say E, I'm gonna do both of these, and let's hit examine. And right now nothing happens when I move my mouse. And when I click, I'm holding down the mouse button, the can rotate, or whatever we called it, boolean is now set to true. And if I move my mouse now, it rotates. X rotates it on the Z axis, but it's inverted. And then Y rotates it on the Y axis. It seems we actually want Y to rotate on the X instead of the Y. I must have written that down wrong. Let's test it out now. Yeah, and that's much better. Except we also want that one inverted, so we can multiply this by -1 and plug it into X. And now it rotates the way we want it to. Yeah, much better. So now we can examine our entire item. If you want to change the sensitivity of how this rotates, we just have to go into our examination and just pull all this back. And you just need to add another multiply node. So another float by float. And you just need to multiply it by a number. So if you want it to be half as sensitive as it was, you can just multiply that by 0.5. And I'd do the same for the top one. If you want it to be more sensitive, you could multiply it by like 2, but I think I want it less, so I'll try 0.5, and let it play. Let's test it on the batteries this time. Let's hit examine, and that looks great. Alright, we can now rotate our mesh when we examine it. Last thing I want to go over is something we didn't in the last episode, which was the examination mesh offset, how far you want it from the actual camera. And before we start that, we can focus in on our camera here by hitting the F key. If you want to change the perspective, 90 might be a bit too high, you can do it right here with field of view. 45 might be something a little better. You could try that. But now our items might appear too close, even though the dimensions might look a little better. So yeah, as you can see, it is cut off, and we don't want that. And it gets a little too close to the camera right here. So we need to move it farther back. So what we could do is we could move the actual default item farther back. I'm just going to reset these two back to 0. Sometimes it gets incredibly tiny values. That doesn't matter. To like 30. So this is just the default value. But then the flashlight, or the door key, let's give it an examination mesh offset of -10, so it moves. So it's actually going to be 40 units away from the camera. We can hit play, hit E, and examine. And I just realized I put -10 when I meant to put 10. We want it 40, that just moves it back to 20, which made it look the same. And let's hit examine, and now it is farther away. And then if we go back to our battery, this one is still at 30, so it is a little closer than the door key is. For an extreme example, just to show it works, we can set this to like 100, and hit play, and examine, and you can see it's pretty far away now. But I think 10 worked, and might want to even move the flashlight battery a little closer, so we can try something like -5. And let's see how that looks. And just make sure it doesn't get cut off on the edges. I think that looks great. And that's how we deal with the examination mesh offset. Alright, that'll be it for this episode. In the next one, we'll worry about adding extra inventory slots in-game.